I'm going to introduce your next speaker. You may have seen her book sitting outside in the lobby. Her name is Melody Warnick, and she wrote the most glorious long title. I love long title books. This is Where You Belong, The Art and Science of Loving Where You Live, which I think is just such a perfect title to talk about at this placemaking conference. Please welcome Melody Warnick.
I can't believe she told you about the snacks right now, right before I came on, because there's no way I can compete with snacks. But I will do my best. So I'm Melody Warnick, and that's not me. A couple months after I moved to Blacksburg, Virginia in 2012, I got a writing assignment that took me to West Virginia, to a little town called Laredo. And this woman, Gertie Moore, volunteered to show me around, to be my tour guide to the place. So the first thing we did was we got in my minivan, and she said, just drive to the top of my street here. So I drove up the street, and then she told me something that blew my mind. She said, I have lived on this street my entire life. She showed me. She had been born in a house at the very top of the street, and then as a child, she had moved a few houses down, and then she got married, and she moved to a different house, but she literally never had left the street. Meanwhile, this is the map of all the places I've lived in my life. And I imagine that if we took a poll and I asked you how many places you lived, there would be people whose maps would look far more like spaghetti than mine does. We are a mobile people. We move a lot as Americans, and we move for all different reasons. We move for jobs, we move to retire, we move to get near family, we move because we have a new project in Stanton, Virginia. We move because we're bored with where we live. And often we move because we're just not happy where we are, and we think that another town will be a better place for us. So that's kind of what was happening to me in Blacksburg. My husband got a job at Virginia Tech, and we moved there from Austin, Texas, thinking that Blacksburg was going to be the small town Shangri-La that would make all our dreams come true and make life better in a million different ways. Except we got there, and it didn't. It wasn't that great. It rained a lot, and moving is just hard. It's lonely. It's chaotic. For the first few months, you don't know anyone. You don't know where anything is. You don't know where to find the stuff you need in the grocery store. It can be incredibly overwhelming. And when I'm in that situation, my knee-jerk reaction is to say, okay, we'll move again. Obviously, we just are not meant to be here. We're not happy. We will move again, and I'm going to spend some more time on Realtor.com. But I was starting to have bad feelings about that. My older daughter was starting 5th grade at her 3rd elementary school in 3 different states. And my younger daughter had absolutely no memory of the place where she had spent the first 3.5 years of her life. I felt that it was time for us to stay put for a while, to actually settle in a place and put down roots and learn to be happy where we were. But I actually had no idea how to do that. So I started looking into it, doing a little research, and I came across this term. I will just soldier ahead because the clock is ticking. I came across a term for this, and it's called place attachment. We've heard this word this phrase at this conference. Place attachment is the feeling of being at home in a place. It is a term that suggests the emotional bond we feel with our community. So if you've ever gone out of town and returned back and thought, oh, I'm so glad to be home, that's place attachment. If you've ever said there's no place like home, that's place attachment. So place attachment is a little bit touchy-feely, but it actually has real benefits. Place attachment and the things that are associated with it, like social cohesion and community engagement, are known to make you happier. There are studies that show that people who are place attached have higher levels of well-being. They're healthier. They actually tend to live longer. So there are real benefits to being attached to where you live, to putting down roots and loving it. But I still didn't know quite how it happened. We've heard a few people mention this study, the Soul of the Community study. The Knight Foundation got together with Gallup, and they wanted to know what made people feel attached to their communities. So they surveyed 26,000 people in 26 different American towns and cities all over the country over the course of 3 years, and they asked them about this. They asked them questions about how well do you like where you live? How well do you like the police force? How well do you like the school system, the parks? Do you think where you live is beautiful? They ask them weird questions like, imagine your life is a ladder, and the bottom rung is your worst life, and the top rung is your best possible life, and what rung of the ladder are you on? And then they, crunched some numbers, and at the end, they found a startling consistency between what made people feel attached to their place. And there were 3 qualities that were the same in communities across the country, no matter where they were and no matter what size they were. And they are not necessarily what you'd expect. First is social offerings, or feeling like your town has things to do and people to do it with. Second, aesthetics, or feeling like where you live is beautiful. And third, openness, or feeling like your place is welcoming to all kinds of people and it has opportunities for everyone. So if you live in a community and feel like it does pretty well on these 3 factors, social offerings, aesthetics, and openness, chances are good you will be more attached. And the really nice thing about place attachment is it has a kind of astounding economic benefit, that in communities where people are more place attached, local GDP rises. So towns that are loved tend to do better economically. There's also this, which is that these days, even as a lot of people move, they're thinking more about where they want to live. They are thinking long and hard about where they want to settle. Once upon a time, it used to be that you went where the job was, and it didn't really matter where that was. Now people are choosing first, I want to live in Raleigh or Roanoke or New York City, and then they find the job to get them there. So here's where the rubber meets the road. I'm going to give you a little place attachment quiz for you to find out how attached you are to where you live right now. There are 10 items on this quiz, and you should have 10 fingers, probably. So count how many times you answer yes, and I'm going to ask you about it. So first, I feel rooted here. The friendships I have with people in this town mean a lot to me. I like to tell people about where I live. I'm really interested in knowing what's going on here. I don't want to move anytime soon. My town isn't perfect, but there are a lot of things that make me love it. I feel loyal to this community. I care about the future success of this town. If something exciting were happening in this community, I'd want to be involved. It feels like home. Okay, so if you scored a 7 or above, make some noise. Nice. If you scored a perfect 10, make some noise. That seems unscientifically, I'm going to say that that's a really good result. And I'm not surprised because we are at a conference called CityWorks Expo. You are maybe a self-selected group of people who actually care about this. And it's not really a coincidence, because one of the things I learned about place attachment is that when you invest, you feel invested. Now, that can be economic. We heard yesterday about Dan Gilbert, who has poured millions and millions of dollars into his hometown of Detroit, Michigan. And then there's Tony Hsieh, who started the Downtown Project in Las Vegas. He's the founder of Zappos, and he has, again, spent millions of dollars and lots of time revitalizing a rundown urban neighborhood in Las Vegas. But it doesn't have to be completely economic. And in fact, it's true that when you are invested, you invest. But the act of investing in your community or engaging in it makes you feel more invested. Nancy Barton is an art professor at NYU in Manhattan, and one day she and her husband were driving around upstate New York, and they stumbled across this tiny little town called Prattsville. It has about 700 residents. And Nancy immediately felt drawn to what she called its blue-collar John Waters vibe, and they ended up buying a house there, a second home. So for 11 years, they split their time between Manhattan and Prattsville. But they didn't know that many people, and they weren't that involved in the community. It was just kind of a place that they went. Then this happened. In 2011, Hurricane Irene washed over the area and flooded Prattsville. Water was hurtling down at their main street at the pace of Niagara Falls and washed buildings off their foundations and destroyed half of the town. So Nancy started going to public meetings that the town was having about how can we rebuild Prattsville. And at one of these meetings, a few people said, you know what Prattsville really needs? It really needs a gathering place, like a community center or a place where people can go. Nancy was sitting in this meeting, and she could have just kept her yapper shut and not said anything about that. But instead, she raised her hand and said, I know something about that. Nancy ended up getting a $200,000 Art Place America grant that she used to buy a hardware store on Prattsville's Main Street. And over the course of several years, and with lots of help from other people in the community, she refurbished it into the Prattsville Art Center and residency. On the main floor, there's space for art classes, and they have a gallery space, and in the back, they have a coffee house where anyone can come, and it has become a haven for teenagers in particular in the community. And because she has gotten involved in this way, she has become the person in Prattsville that everyone knows and everyone loves. Nancy's engagement with Prattsville has completely changed because she decided to step in and do something. If you love your city, you should do what's good for it, and maybe that seems obvious. I met this guy a couple of weeks ago. His name is Joe Burgum, and he lives in Fargo, North Dakota, and as you can see, Joe loves Fargo. And for those of us who live in Virginia, that might be a little confusing, why you love Fargo, North Dakota. You probably are thinking of wood chippers right now, if you've seen that movie. But Joe is from Fargo, and he's incredibly devoted to it. And he also has a creative entrepreneurial mind. He likes to make things happen, and he likes to make things happen in his community. So when he realized that Fargo didn't have a farmer's market, and that was a bummer, he started one. And then one day he said, you know what would be cool? What if we put a festival in Fargo's back alleys where no one ever goes, and we brought food and music? And so he did it. Fargo is known for being a place with really tough winters. So this past year, Joe, with some of his friends, built a mobile sauna. And this has become the way that people in Fargo feel better about where they live in the winter. So Joe is doing all this because he loves where he lives and he wants to make it better. Now, the thing about that is probably, I'm guessing that most people in this room are not jumping to move to Fargo. But what Joe's doing is making this place desirable for the people who already live there. I talked to a city commissioner who said that it used to be that if you were going to high school in Fargo, you graduated and you were out of there. No one wanted to stay. But now people do, and the rate of incoming people has grown their population at twice the rate in the past few years because of that. One thing I've learned about places is that there really is no one singular definition of any city. Any city in the country has people who really love it and are incredibly attached to it, and people who can't stand it. Here's an example of how that works. A few weeks ago, I saw this image on social media, and because I'm a book nerd, I tweeted about it, and I said something like, oh, this makes me want to move to Cleveland. I ruled out Boston, that's too expensive, but in my imaginary, I'm going to move somewhere, I said, I'm going to move to Cleveland. That's a city for book lovers. And one of my friends tweeted me a link to a fake Cleveland tourism ad in response.
Fun times in Cleveland again. Still Cleveland. Come on down to Cleveland town, everyone. Under construction since 1868. See our river that catches on fire. It's so polluted that all our fish have AIDS. We see the sun almost 3 times a year. This guy has at least 2 DUIs. The flats look like a Scooby-Doo ghost town. Don't slow down in East Cleveland or you'll die.
So that's just a taste of it. And there are more where that came from. And then the very next day after that, I saw this headline, that Cleveland is a city that's super attractive to millennials. So the cognitive dissonance here is getting to epic proportions. Any city in America could have a video like that made about it, so let's not laugh too hard. It is all about how you think of your town, what your perception is. When Knight and Gallup did the Soul of the Community study, and they asked people how they felt about, say, social offerings, you know what city came out the very top of the list of social offerings? The people thought their social offerings were the best. It was Grand Forks, North Dakota. And Grand Forks, North Dakota beat out cities like Denver and Miami and Charlotte, North Carolina. Now, this was not an objective measure that Grand Forks really had, that many more awesome museums and sporting events. It was that people in Grand Forks loved where they lived. They had chosen to like it, and they saw the good in it. Next slide. Next slide. So that's the awesome message of this, and the good news is that you can change your place attachment. I didn't ask anyone in this room to admit whether they had scored like a 3 or less on that place attachment quiz I gave you, but I imagine that there are some people here who did. But place attachment is really malleable, and that's what I discovered when I was writing my book, This Is Where You Belong, that you can change how you feel about your town by changing your behavior and the way you think about it. I needed to learn to like Blacksburg. I didn't really want to move again, but I wanted to be happier where I lived. And so I started doing, I called them love where you live experiments, little things that would make me feel better about my town. I spent more time in nature. I went hiking. I walked more. I shopped at local stores. I joined a cash mob. There's a toy store called Imaginations that's down the street from where I live, and I committed that I would buy all my kids' birthday presents at Imaginations to support it. And by the way, their Roanoke store is just up the street, and you should totally go there. I joined a CSA. I shopped at the farmer's market. I tried to become a regular at a restaurant in Blacksburg. That one didn't work out so well. I decided that instead of complaining that there was nothing to do in Blacksburg, I would become good at doing what Blacksburg was good at. Blacksburg happens to be really good at hokey football, and so even though I hate football, I went to hokey football games and I learned to at least love the Enter Sandman part. And I started to make things happen in my community. My daughter had this idea about starting a sidewalk chalk festival, and instead of just shutting her down and saying that's lame, we actually did it. I wanted to be like Nancy Barton. I realized that everything in my community that I loved was started by someone who raised their hand and said, I will do that. I know something about that. And I wanted to be that kind of person. Here's a little experiment that you can do where you live, and it's really an easy way to boost place attachment and measure it as well. At a festival in Blacksburg this summer, I printed these little signs and I had people fill them out. And it really taught me a lot about the kinds of things that people love in communities. We love our communities because they let us do the things that matter to us. We love our communities because they're aesthetically pleasing and beautiful. We love our communities because of the social offerings and because there's great people there to do things with. We love our communities because we chose them. We have chosen to make them our home. It is a matter of how we think. And we love our communities because when people work together and say yes to things, we can make our places better. The thing I've learned about place attachment is when we are place attached, we make our cities better, and when our cities are better, they make us better. So be happy where you are. Thank you.